the classical period, we saw that the piano was a very popular instrument. Mozart wrote lots of music for it, as did Haydn, Beethoven. It was new and exciting at the time. Once we get into the Romantic period, that fondness for the piano does not go away. In fact, many of the piano pieces that you are most familiar with are from this period of time. So we're going to take a look at 3 pieces of piano music from the Romantic period. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them because at this point you actually know enough about Romantic style that you can think about that for yourself and think about how it uses emotions and dramatic dynamic changes, tempo changes, and all those things that are standard elements of Romantic style. But we're going to listen to 3 different composers just to get a sense of the breadth of kinds of things that composers could do. We have in the Romantic some very intimate little pieces that are fairly short, and for classical music, short might be 6 or 7 minutes, but shorter compared to, say, an hour-long symphony. But we also have really long pieces. So in piano music, we have these intimate little pieces that we generally refer to as a group as lyric piano pieces. They have lots of little titles, but we can kind of group them that way. On the other end of the spectrum for piano, we would have things like piano concerto, where you would have the piano plus an orchestra. So a wide range of things. I'm trying to give you a little bit of breadth here without getting to the part with the orchestra. So we're going to start with a piece by Clara Schumann. This is the wife of Robert Schumann, whom we met when we talked about art song. She was a composer in her own right. She was also a performer. But this is a period of time when women didn't really have lots of opportunities to perform. She did perform publicly and actually helped support her family when her husband was no longer able to do that. But she's one of 2 composers that I can think of right off the top of my head, women composers from the Romantic period that are pretty well known. So we have Clara Schumann, and we have Fanny Mendelssohn, who was the sister of Felix Mendelssohn, who was a famous composer as well. So we might think there's some gene pool going here about who makes a good composer. Clara's father was a violin teacher, and when she and Robert met and fell in love, her father was very much opposed to that and did not want them to get married. I think there was a bit of an age gap in there. But they just kind of persisted until she was old enough that she could get married without her father's permission anyway. So that worked out, and they were very happy together, apparently. Had 8 children, I think. But not only did she compose her own music, she was a really strong proponent of her husband's work. So she would perform his work. As I said, he injured his own hands and wasn't able to perform everything that he wrote, but she would perform it for him. So, he had like the perfect PR person for him, I guess. She loved him, she loved his music, and she could get out there and do the performances for him. But as a composer herself, there were limitations to what a woman composer was expected to be able to do. So women composers tended to write things for piano because that was sort of, you could be ladylike and play the piano. They tended to write vocal music, things for chamber groups. So we have some Clara Schumann, we have some trios, like piano trios and those sorts of things. But we don't see things like big concerti and symphonies and things like that from women composers of the time. It just wasn't the thing that they were expected to do, in the same way that they would not be expected to be a star violinist. That was just not something that women did. So we're lucky we have music from these 2 women. So I want you to listen to a piece for piano by Clara Schumann. This is her Romance No. 1, which is an Opus 11. A romance is not a love story in this period of time and this type of piece. It's a piece that's lyrical, warm. It could even be a sad, emotional kind of piece. So a romance in the sense of, we think of the whole period of being emotional, not in the sense of love itself. So listen now to Clara Schumann's Romance. All right, now we're going to switch over to a composer that you may be more familiar with, and that is Frédéric Chopin. So Chopin was famous for piano works. In fact, almost everything he wrote has piano in it. He wrote tons of solo piano works. He wrote a lot of pieces for piano and orchestra. He did write a few other things, but really when you think Chopin, you think piano. In fact, he's so associated with the piano that we call him the poet of the piano. So he is it for the piano. So Chopin was Polish. So a lot of his pieces have that Polish influence. He used Polish dance forms, and the piece that we're going to listen to is one of those. But he spent most of his life in France. So the legend is that when he died, his body was buried in France, but his heart is buried in Poland. They literally took his heart and buried it in Poland. So there's a good romantic story for you there, right? They talk about your emotional, supernatural, eerie kinds of things to do. So Chopin and Liszt and Eugene Delacroix, the painter, all these people were friends with each other. They all hung out together and interacted with each other. So their music, you can see the influences on each other. Chopin had a long-term relationship with George Sand, who was the female author. Her real name was Aurora Dudevant. He was sickly. We're not quite sure what he had. They think maybe it was cystic fibrosis, which would have caused him to have a lot of breathing troubles. Could have been tuberculosis, or any number of things he could have had that would cause the kinds of symptoms that he had. But George Sand always thought that if she just got him some exercise, he'd be all better. But that didn't quite work out. So he died young, but we still have lots and lots of music by him. So I want you to listen to one of his polonaises. A polonaise is a Polish dance that it's very typical. He wrote lots of them. He also wrote mazurkas, which is another Polish dance style. So if you see those kinds of names on pieces, you'll know that those are related to a specific culture, and that's kind of typical of piano music from the period. So you're going to listen to his polonaise in A flat major. Opus 53, so this is a sort of a middle work for him, and you'll recognize it. It's has the nickname of being the heroic polonaise, and it is very heroic in its style. So sort of think about this and compare the style of Clara Schumann, the woman who's has sort of the restrictions that women had placed on them, and then Chopin's heroic polonaise. So listen to that now. All right, and we're going to finish up our little visit to romantic piano music with Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was a very interesting character. He was, he had children with women he wasn't married to, but he was very religious, and at the end of his life, he went into the monastery and lived there until he died, and just a very dramatic kind of guy. He spent a lot of time as a performer. Made a lot of money as a performer, but he was also very busy as a composer. As a performer, he's given us some important things that we still do today. Up until this period of time, if you had gone to an orchestra concert and there was the piano or harpsichord being used as a continua kind of thing, it would have been seated so that the performer had their back to you. So if I'm the orchestra and you're my audience right now, the piano would be here and I'd be sitting with my back to you, and you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. Well, Liszt, as a performer, wanted people to be able to see his profile. He thought he looked really good in profile. So he turned the piano to the position that we now associate with the way that pianos are supposed to be. So we can all see their hands now, which is we like as a feature of that, but his purpose was slightly different from that. He also used to come out on the stage and he would toss his gloves onto the floor, way before Michael Jackson did the whole glove thing. And he would just toss his gloves on the floor, and then women would fight over it. And he had groupies, and the women just loved him. So he was a very popular artist and amazing performer. He had these huge hands, so he could play like really wide spans of notes that most other performers couldn't do. And he wrote music that would allow him to do that. When most people think about Liszt music, they think about that sort of spectacular, bombastic, very flashy kind of performance, because that's sort of our mental picture of Liszt. It's certainly not all he did. He did plenty of music that is not at all like that. The piece we're going to listen to is one of his Hungarian rhapsodies. So his background is Hungarian, but like everybody else, he was in Paris at the time. That was the place to be if you were an artist, was Paris. So he wrote several versions of Hungarian rhapsodies. He also wrote some Hungarian dances, so you will see that sort of thing coming up over and over again. I think the really nice thing about this for you is, in terms of learning about romantic style, is that it is so dramatically different from one section to the next. It really shows you that range of changing dynamics and changing tempos and changing styles within within a single piece of music. You'll recognize this. It's been done by everybody in the world, including Bugs Bunny and Tom and Jerry. It's one of those pieces that is just iconic. So I want you to listen now to the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 by Franz Liszt, and then you will have had a pretty good introduction to some of the styles and things that composers of piano music in the Romantic period would have done.